It's my true honor to introduce Dr. Susan Bauer-Wu, president of the Mind and Life Institute, the world's premier multidisciplinary organization for the scientific study of mindfulness and meditation. Founded in 1991 by the Dalai Lama and neuroscientist Francisco Varela. I'm personally forever grateful to the Mind and Life Institute because the Mind and Life Institute gave me my first research grant back when I was a PhD student. It was to the sum total of $15,000. And that $15,000 grant to study mindfulness has grown into over $20 million in research funding. So not only has the money grown in terms of a great return on investment in supporting science, but these projects that I personally have done that have grown out of the Varela grant have alleviated the suffering of literally more than 1,000 people. So I thank you for them too. Susan Bauer-Wu has also dedicated her career to alleviating suffering. With a foundation as a registered nurse caring for individuals with cancer and mental illness, as well as those facing the end of life, she's had a stellar academic career studying and applying contemplative practices in healthcare and in higher education. Prior to joining the Mind and Life Institute, Dr. Bauer-Wu was a named professor in contemplative end-of-life care at the University of Virginia School of Nursing and associate faculty in the University of Virginia Department of Religious Studies, as well as on the executive committee of the University of Virginia Contemplative Sciences Center. Dr. Bauer-Wu has garnered significant federal, foundation, and private funding for research on meditation-based and contemplative interventions and programs for people living with serious illness and their loved ones, as well as for the healthcare professionals who care for these individuals. Her training background is in psychoneuroimmunology, and followed by postdoctoral training in psycho-oncology and behavioral medicine at Dartmouth Medical School. Her first full-time faculty appointment was at the University of Massachusetts Medical School, where she collaborated with the University of Massachusetts Center for Mindfulness, which, if you're not familiar, that's really the group that got this whole business started with integrating mindfulness into healthcare. This was when the integration of her personal meditation practice and professional work as a researcher and teacher of mindfulness-based interventions took root. She then went on to Harvard Medical School and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where she led a robust research center focused on enhancing cancer patients' quality of life and quality of clinical care. Later, Dr. Bauer-Wu was at Emory University as an associate professor of nursing and as a Georgia Cancer Coalition Distinguished Scholar. She co-created the Emory Collaborative for Contemplative Studies and contributed to the teaching of Tibetan Buddhist monks in science. Dr. Bauer-Wu is a fellow in the American Academy of Nursing, past president of the Society for Integrative Oncology, a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Executive Nurse Fellow, and in my opinion, an all-around delightful, brilliant, and caring human being. I count her among my most esteemed mentors, and I'm deeply honored that she would come here to give the keynote at the launch of this center. Thank you, Susan. Please join me in welcoming her.
This is the real mic.
That's the real mic. This is the recording mic.
Okay,
Put that
so
on first.
just give me a moment. I didn't think about what I was putting on today. I have no collars to put this on, so let me just think about this for a second. Put this down. Put this one on. So this is for the recording. And I'll put it on my skirt in the back. Sorry, guys. Right. That's okay. And this I think I'll just hold in my hand.
Okay.
So thank you, Eric, for that. It's right there. Yeah, for a very, very kind introduction. And it's wonderful to see you all here. I wasn't sure in the middle of the summer if anybody would show up. And it speaks to how excited people are to the launch of this center. And congratulations on all the success that you've had and the ability to really pull together this interdisciplinary, cross-institutional, cross-university program. Before I begin, I think we're good. And is that a... I can.
Yep, it's working.
Okay, great. Can you all hear me in the back? Okay. Dean, yes, you can hear me good. Okay. So as we begin this time together, I just invite you to just be present. I'm not going to be doing a guided meditation, but I want you to be fully present as best you can and just noticing what's alive in you right now. And just realizing that you're here in community. And taking a moment to even reflect on your intention for being here. Was there anything more than the free lunch that brought you here? So this image is one that speaks to me very much. The idea of just one drop and there being many, many ripples and concentric circles that happen as a result of the one drop. And each one of you is a drop that creates a ripple effect and on the lives of so many other people. So whether or not you're a clinician or a teacher or a researcher or administrator, every one of you is touching lives all the time. And don't ever forget the power of that and the power of your presence with others. That makes the difference. Before I begin, I want to get a sense. There are seats over here if you want to come on up and. Okay. How many of you have practiced mindfulness in some way before, some form? Okay, look at this. So I'd say it's easily 3 out of 4 people. And so you already drank the Kool-Aid, which is great. But we also know that it's not just one thing and one kind of program, but there's many, and there's all, and so it's going to be taking a lot of creativity in that program. But that's good to know. How many of you would consider yourself a clinician of some kind? Nurse, social worker, doctor, okay? Basic scientist? You? Okay. Clinical scientist? Anybody from the humanities here? No one, okay. Well, more than probably some of others have gotten, right. So we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's really important to have people from the humanities involved in these conversations. Okay, great. So the title of my talk is Contemplative Sciences, Integrating Mindfulness into Research, Healthcare, and Society. And it's contemplative sciences because it's very much the incorporation of all of the different kinds of sciences, from basic sciences to social sciences, clinical sciences, and applied science, the other applied sciences. So my objectives, I'm going to provide a brief history of contemplative sciences, because there's actually a term now, and then there's sub-terms of contemplative sciences called contemplative neuroscience, contemplative clinical sciences, et cetera. And a brief history of the Mind and Life Institute, which is the organization where I come from, where this work was really, really born. Provide a definition, working definition of mindfulness, and describe some background of different mindfulness interventions, and just to highlight a little bit of the research, a little bit of the trends in the research as I highlight some of the studies that we're even funding at Mind and Life. And to end with shedding light on the importance of why a center like this and why these kind of interventions are needed, really so needed at this time, in not only in healthcare, but in our broader society. And I understand that we will have opportunities. We're going to have a panel. We'll have an opportunity for question and answers and discussion. So this is a photo of His Holiness the Dalai Lama with Francisco Varela, the late Francisco Varela. Both of them are co-founders of the Mind and Life Institute. And there was a third co-founder, Adam Engel, who's a businessman entrepreneur who was more on the organizational side of things to get the organization started. But why would somebody like Francisco Varela, who was a brilliant neuroscientist, and also a biologist, and a philosopher, and a contemplative practitioner, and he's kind of a Renaissance man, getting him together with the Dalai Lama, particularly when they did it, their first meeting was in 1987, seemed really unlikely. But that meeting and that coming together, I believe, planted the seed, was the drop in the water, really, that is bringing us all together today. And you may think, well, why? Why would someone who's such a serious scientist come together with a Buddhist teacher, a Buddhist leader and a Buddhist teacher? And they both had their reasons why. So the Dalai Lama loves science. He said if he wasn't a monk, he'd be an engineer, which I think you need to include the College of Engineering on your, I really think that would be really, really helpful, good idea. But he said if he wasn't a monk, he'd be an engineer. And if any of you have studied Buddhism and all read about it, you know that it is the principles are very scientific. It's about understanding the mind and asking questions and trying to look as objectively as you can to see things just as they are. In the veil of all of our illusions and all of the narratives and stories, what is the underlying truth? And so that was the Dalai Lama coming in from the Buddhist science perspective. And then we had a traditional scientist who's coming in who also had his own contemplative practice and his own meditation practice. And at the heart of this work is about understanding the mind. And I want to really, really emphasize that, because I think that with mindfulness becoming so faddish, there's a serious concern that we can, number one, lose sight that it's connected to some very, very important ancient wisdom traditions. And that's why I want people from the humanities here, philosophers, but also the religious studies scholars as well. It's really important that we don't lose sight of that history and those perspectives. But it is about, mindfulness is about understanding one's mind. So we can most skillfully make sense of what is happening and then most skillfully engage with the world. So it is about understanding the mind. And that's at the heart of meditation. And it's not a quick feel better fast kind of thing, even though you can feel better very quickly from a brief contemplative practice. But we're looking at having impact on comorbidities. And that is really looking at whole person in a very, very deep and serious way. So they came together, and they had that initial conversation, the initial coming together. And this was one of the first meetings, Mind and Life meetings, over 30 years ago. And this is in the Dalai Lama's residence, where we've had many Mind and Life dialogues over the years. And we brought this technology. So any of you ever know Cliff Sarin? He's at the University of California in Davis. And Cliff is a neuroscientist, and he's really, really techie. And he went to India with all these machines, and others have done it over the years, the EEG. And I'll tell you a funny story. The first time that they did this, that they brought the EEG machines there, and they had a room full of monks like this, and the scientists up front, the Dalai Lama there, and they're watching, and they put the electrodes, the EEG electrodes, on the heads of the monk, of a monk. And they were like, why are you doing that? They said, we thought you wanted to study the mind. The mind isn't here. The mind is here. Which is just really, really interesting. It's just a, it's a paradigm shift, and we have to keep that in mind as we're working across different cultures. And it's another really important message for you to think about, that mindfulness isn't just about, and I'm going to talk more about it, but it's not just about paying attention, but it's the spirit of heartfulness that comes in this work, about this whole person, full sense of heartedness that it's about. So just a little bit more about the Mind and Life Institute. It's an organization it's a nonprofit organization, and we're doing work globally. And we are a hub, and we don't have any specific affiliation with one university, but we are bringing people together from all different disciplines and all different institutions. And under my leadership over the last year and a half, a big part of my focus is about taking down silos and being much more inclusive. I'm going to pause for one moment, and I see a lot of people standing in the back, and there's 6 seats right here, so come on up. Okay. Yeah, you're welcome. Great. Okay. Dean, there's one more here. Oh, okay. Okay. So we are the primary catalyst, convener, and community builder for contemplative sciences. And as we're rolling out our new work and priorities, we're looking at being a more formal resource for all of you that are doing the work. And that includes people in the applied side as a way of integrating and synthesizing and curating the research that's being done. And essentially, we integrate science with contemplative wisdom traditions and practices with the ultimate goal of alleviating suffering and promoting flourishing, with the basis of understanding the mind. So we give grants out. Keep that in mind. Our grants range between $15,000 and $100,000. And Eric was a recipient of one of our first grants. Yoshi, did you ever receive a Mind and Life grant?
Well,
Yes, you did. So, and the return on investment of our grants is really quite incredible. So we have the Francisco Varela research grants, which are for new investigators. We have Mind and Life 1440 grants that are for K through 12 education. And then we have a new program called the Peace Grants, which stands for Pro-Social, Empathy, Altruism, Compassion, and Ethics. And in that category, we have $25,000 and $100,000 grants. And then we have think tanks. And the think tanks are about bringing very diverse kinds of people together to explore and tackle an important either academic and research issue or an issue in society. And those are really taking off as well. And so we have a variety of mechanisms that foster our sense of community of both scholars and practitioners. We have a Summer Research Institute every year in New York in June. Every other year we have an International Symposium for Contemplative Research. It's going to be in November in 2018 in Phoenix. And we have a fellows program. We're just launching a new preprint service for contemplative sciences. So if we all know the problems with open access and the issues of academic publishing, and so we are looking at, we are hosting a preprint service in collaboration with the Center for Open Science that's called MIIND Archive, and we're creating a contemplative research commons, which will be digital. So just some examples of some of our recently funded studies. So this one is from Sarah Pretty. Sarah here? Yes? There you go. Okay. So this is Sarah's study, The Impact of Mindfulness-Based Intervention and Opioid Misuse During Pregnancy. Mixed methods. This is on tracking the longitudinal real-world socio-emotional benefits of mindfulness training in youth. Investigating the impact of yoga on brain aging, epigenetic biomarkers of school-based mindfulness program, and a community-engaged approach to contemplative neuroscience in a diverse contemplative community. These are just literally a handful of the hundreds of studies that we're funding, and I want to just emphasize that what makes Strong Mind and Life grants really is interdisciplinary, really integrating mixed methods, all different kinds of methods. We value community-based research as well as qualitative research, as well as very basic biological and neuroscience research as well. So that was just a brief overview of our history and background, and now just take a pause and seeing where you are at this particular time. So just to remember, so to cultivate a way of being that is more mindful, it's often done with formal contemplative practices, formal meditation practices. Meditation and medicine have the same root. Latin word, meditare, to comfort, to heal, to care for. Again, keeping that in mind. So the components of mindfulness, and this is based on the traditional work that Jon Kabat-Zinn started in the 70s, conceptualizing mindfulness as a way of bringing awareness to the present moment, and doing so with an attitude that is non-judgmental. It's hard, that's hard, but it's best we try to be non-judgmental and just sort of see things as they are. And we are intentionally doing that. So we are paying attention on purpose in a particular way. Few points here of what mindfulness is not. And I think we know from doing concept analyses that some of the best ways to really understand a concept is to describe what it's not. And then we all of a sudden get the answer for what it is. So I'm going to share some thoughts I have of what mindfulness is not. It's not trying to achieve a special state of mind. So you don't go, you're not approaching it saying, I'm going to relax. Because the moment that you strive to say you're going to relax, you're actually, in many ways, interfering with the space, the mental space of being more mindful, which then can help you to be more relaxed. You naturally noticed whatever mind states you're experiencing, and you're aware of them, and you don't force them to change. They're going to change anyway. It's not about going into a trance. Rather, it's about being alert and attentive to what is happening. It's not thinking only positive thoughts, though your recovery program might be. But mindfulness more broadly is about noticing the whole continuum of thoughts that we have, positive, negative, neutral. So all of them, because that's what being human is. And if we're not just going to be, we can't just think about positive thoughts because we'll be judging that we're not able to do that all the time. But all thoughts are regarded equally in this general practice. It's not necessarily about doing anything in its purest, simplest sense. It's about being. It's a way of being. And yes, you can do things mindfully, and you can do mindfulness practices, formal meditation practices. But if we're talking about being mindful, it's much more about a state of being. And then it's not about distracting yourself and imagining that you're somewhere else, somewhere where you don't want to be. So we know there are other mind-body practices such as guided imagery that are really, quite effective for a number of different clinical conditions. This is not that. In many ways, it's the antithesis of that. And for many years, I did research and clinical work with patients in the bone marrow transplant unit. And what we did is really helping them to be okay in the hospital for weeks and uncomfortable and not where they want to be. But how can they actually learn to be more accepting to the experience that they are facing? And to me, mindfulness gives more life skills that will help them deal with the challenge, help us deal with the challenges of life, versus guided imagery, where it's kind of an escape, maybe in some ways like way people refer to drugs and other substances as an escape. So another definition that I've made sense of in my practice and in teaching is our ability to intentionally bring awareness to the present moment experience with an attitude of openness, curiosity, and being awake to the fullness of our lives, using all 5 senses, and then also noticing the continuum of our minds. And in that noticing, we're not holding on to the things that we just like or pushing away things we don't like, but we're noticing all of it. It's all okay. And we're stopping autopilot. And we're also learning to respond skillfully instead of reacting like a knee-jerk reaction. It's more wise action. So this is, in essence, what mindfulness is. Many people say, I can't be mindful. It's not, I'm too jittery. I got to go, 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 go. But I want to say is you can go, 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 but in a way that's with some kind of awareness. And it's innately in all of us. We've just kind of moved away from it over time. So it's kind of pop right now, and there is science that's being done, and we know that meditation can change the brain. And why do we know that? How do we know that? Well, neuroplasticity, last 20 years, we have come to the great realization that, in fact, we can grow and expand different parts of our brain if we use them, other parts of our brain, if we don't use, they aren't quite as sharp, and we can re-engage the neural circuitry and reconnect different parts of the brain that we didn't think was possible just 30 years ago. And so in this way, I believe all the kind of interventions and the programs that you're going to be doing and you are doing are types of mental trainings. They're mental trainings that impact the body and they impact your behavior. So it's about, this neuroplasticity idea is in many ways like physical exercise, but they're mental exercises. So brief history, we mentioned it a bit, but I think it's just really important to just take a moment and to name that, yes, Mind and Life and the research that undergirds this work is a big part of the boom right now, but these mindfulness-based practices really took root as a result of John Kabat-Zinn's work at the University of Massachusetts. Began the program in 1979, and seeing where we are today. I mean, John would never have ever imagined this in his wildest dreams, and he did not begin this work to become famous and to have a real popular program, but he did it. He was driven by this desire to alleviate suffering, informed by his own personal meditation practice. And John, by the way, for those of you who don't know him, he's an MIT-trained molecular scientist, and was trained by a Nobel laureate. And so he comes with a real deep scientific understanding, as well as a very open, compassionate heart. So the MBSR program is an 8-week outpatient program. You have great MBSR programs here in this town. I know one of the teachers very well, Vicki Overfelt. She and I actually did our teacher development intensive through the UMass Center for Mindfulness together. She's a great resource, as well as others at the university and in the community. And so there's lots of mindfulness-based interventions. And there's also a lot of studies to support these interventions. And so this chart, just take a moment and look at the steep curve. And once you start getting some of your papers out with the new grants that are happening, it's just skyrocketing. It's crazy how this is going. But last year, these are peer-reviewed scientific papers on mindfulness. So this year, it's estimating it's going to be probably close to 800-900 papers this year. So examples of studies, and this is just a smattering, and these are NIH-funded studies on mindfulness. So different kinds of cancer, military veterans, the elderly, eating, weight loss and eating disorders, drug addiction, smoking cessation, heart disease, pain, skin disorders, insomnia, at-risk behaviors, asthma, etc. It's going down. At the end, it has resilience among police officers. So we're now looking at really bringing this work out into the communities as well, but in research format. So a lot of studies are being done, have been done over the last 20 years, 15 to 20 years in particular, that look at how these mental practices, in fact, change the brain function. And these findings were the first findings that we found with meditation training. The first work with meditation training, with mindfulness meditation training, it's actually started out through our Mind and Life work and doing research on sort of the Olympic athletes of meditation. And these are basically meditation practitioners, monks, other meditation adepts who practice 10, 20, 30,000 hours. And so we learned a lot about them. And from that's where the program started becoming adapted, and the mindfulness-based interventions have been unfolding. But we know that these are the core areas of this type of attention awareness training. So better able to focus attention. And as we look at these, just think about your own work, your own lives, your work with your students, your children, your parents. So focusing attention. We are in a distracted age like never before. And we know that these practices help us to focus better and handle distractions better. Less ruminations. Better ability to adapt to unexpected changes. Things don't always go our way, do they? Monitoring and perceiving the environment. I could say, as a former clinical nurse, monitoring and perceiving the environment is a really important thing because there's many things happening at the same time. Perceiving our internal body sensations. Foundational to most of these mindfulness-based interventions is this idea of body scans or interoceptivity, which is tuning into your own bodily viscera. And if we are too much living in our heads, we're not even in tune with the cues that our body is giving us all the time. And we also know that in empathy research, that the ability to tune into one's internal bodily experience and sense your body sensations yourself is foundational to experiencing true empathy. Because you can't put yourself in the shoes of another if you can't even put yourself in your own shoes. And then less activation of fear regions. These are just some examples, but these are some of the classic work and time again. And these are examples of some of the many mindfulness-based interventions that are around right now. There's lots of them. The Mbsr, and then there's Nbct, which I'm going to talk more about. There's eating therapy and child preventing, relapse prevention, elder care, cancer recovery, art. Mental fitness training is specific to the military. And then we have more, which is mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement. So just want to highlight an example of this translation, this trajectory that I think has been beautifully done and might be a really good model for some of the work you're doing. So mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is an 8-week program. And it's an adaptation of the Mbsr program. It's sort of this marriage of Mbsr, mindfulness-based stress reduction, with cognitive behavioral training, CBT. And it's particularly developed for people with a history of depression. And it's been extensively studied in preventing relapse from depression. So just to walk you through some of the highlights of what some of the key study findings. This was one of the first studies they did, 2000, John Teasdale at Oxford in England. And this was comparing mindfulness-based cognitive therapy with treatment as usual. And this was really phenomenal, looking at 60 weeks later, the difference and how basically the relapse of depression was less than half those that were in the Nbct group. That study has been repeated a few times. Now this is a really exciting study, I think, because it looks head-on at Nbct and antidepressant therapy to prevent depression relapse. And this was published in Lancet in 2015. And look at that. What do you see here? They look about the same. And so basically this is showing that there is essentially no difference between an 8-week biobehavioral program and very expensive drug therapy that people will have to take every day for years.
Can I ask a question? Does that include that people are practicing on a regular basis after that 8-week program, or just they're doing that 8-week program and nothing else?
It's an 8-week program, and then what happens, and we can talk about it in the panel. We'll come back to it, okay? Yep. And I'll just, if you're interested in this particular topic in Nbct, Zindel Siegel, who's at the University of Toronto, he did a keynote at our International Symposium Contemplative Studies last November. That was a great overview of the field, really, really well done. And you could see it on YouTube. All of our master lectures and keynotes are available. You could take a look at it. But Zindel's keynote was phenomenal. And he's a serious clinical scientist. So in the UK, it's actually now a core component of the national health system there. And this is funded for the treatment of preventing relapse of depression. And then the UK has taken this work so seriously that they're going beyond Nbct for depression, but they actually have a whole plan that's been approved by the Parliament called Mindful Nation UK, and that was approved in October 2015. So my very last part here is just to recognize and for us to think about the societal implications of what this all means. There's so much suffering. Medical center, the elementary schools, in the various homes, nursing homes. It's pretty incredible. And I love this quote by Margaret Cullen, who's a really wonderful mindfulness teacher in the Bay Area. She says, being mindfulness, is an antidote to the disease of the 21st century life and its attendant ever-increasing pull toward multitasking and 24/7 connectivity. The costs to our mental and physical well-being are many and may include depression, anxiety, and a variety of stress-related health concerns. So our bodies and our minds can only handle so much. And with a mindfulness practice, I like to think of it, it is like being in like a muddy pond. That the muddy pond is the fullness of our lives, and our brains are just going all the time. And if you just kind of let it settle and let the waters calm, the mud will settle. And it just settles, and you could see more clearly and live more wisely by just giving yourself these little micro moments of mental space. And again, if you're having trouble kind of getting this, just hang out with kids under age 7, say, and also puppies, and maybe the two of them together with an ice cream cone. And this is kokoros. Remember I talked about the EEG and electrodes, and this is a Japanese symbol for both mind and heart. No distinction, not a separate word. It's one word. So again, cultivating a spirit of not just paying attention, but cultivating this sense of heartfulness. And this was just some work that I've done. I have done a lot of work with end-of-life care, and this was this idea of building a sense of compassionate and contemplative silence between patients and clinicians. Healthcare, care of the caregivers is really important. It was a major focus of my work before I left the University of Virginia. And we absolutely, it's essential that it's part of clinician education. And then it's not only for clinicians to bring to their patients, but it's for their own self-care, their own survival. And this was a study, this was a classic study led by colleagues at the University of Rochester, published in JAMA. It was a 1-year mindfulness program. It was an 8-week program, then once a month for a year with primary care physicians, and found benefits in terms of professional satisfaction and their clinical care. And this was a study that looked at mindful clinicians, and it was an observational study, and it was not interventional, but I find it really, really interesting. And so the bottom line, which we would know, we wouldn't be surprised, think about your own self or your own family member going to see a clinician. Somebody who actually seems like they're present and not running out the door looking at a computer screen. You probably think it's more patient-centered, right? Because it is. And there's a more positive emotional tone, and you leave just feeling better because you've been around that. But many clinicians that I work with say that they don't have any more time to be mindful. They just don't have it. Well, the reality is that the study looked at the length, and there was no difference in the amount of the clinical encounter. But it's just the quality of the encounter that's different. And I did a bunch of studies. I had a decade program of research as it relates to mindfulness-based intervention with stem cell autologous transplant patients to enhance resiliency. Don't have time to get into the results of that here, but suffice to say we had improvements in pain on over 1,300 clinical encounters, more happy, sense of well-being. And then I'm going to just end with this quote here as it relates to the study. And this is the actual gentleman who said this quote. And this is a man who was a self-described type A personality, very successful businessman in every way that we would define success. And he went into the program with great reluctance and signed on to the study because his wife wanted him to. And this is what he said 3 months later. And he said, being mindfulness meditation, has changed the whole quality of my life and has become a daily ritual. It's one of the most important parts of my recovery. It lowered my anxiety, increased my sense of control, relaxes and refreshes me. The more I meditated, the more calm I became. And before, I was always someone who fretted about things. And now, I'm focused on the pleasure of the moment. And the days are not agonizing, even if I'm feeling really ill. He said this, actually, at a time when he learned that his transplant had failed, and there were no other treatment options, and he was home on hospice. And then a few months later, I did not work with him. I was not involved directly, but I was a PI on a study, and I got a card in the mail, and it was from his wife. And she thanked me. And she said that participating in this mindfulness-based intervention made all the difference in the quality of their relationship and the last days that they had together. So I'm going to just end with some closing comments, and these are recommendations for C-MIIND, for Eric, and for all of you collaborators. This is just sort of my little words of wisdom. So, do solid science. Do solid science, but please keep it grounded in real-world matters. Just not do science for science sake, but really connecting it with real suffering. And please collaborate. Please collaborate. Please take down silos and have your work be transdisciplinary with the scientists, with the humanists, clinicians, contemplative practitioners, and those in positions of influence and policy. Just like what they did with the UK, wouldn't it be great if some of these programs actually became part of our healthcare system of what's paid for? And please, and I think in your work of developing a center, this is also a perfect time for you to identify core values that you want to live by, not only as the team of people and cultivating your own sense of community, but even the work that you do. And so for Mind and Life, these are the values that my team and our broader team have that are guiding our work, which is rigor, kind-heartedness, integrity, synergy, and community. So thank you very much.